The wind, a restless phantom, clawed at my face, whipping sand into my eyes. Each grain was a tiny, stinging accusation. I stood at the edge of what the patrol report called the desert crossing point, fence-cut darkness. The name itself felt like a taunt, a perfectly crafted phrase designed to evoke a sense of dread, a feeling I knew all too well. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a fleeting ghost against the vast, indifferent canvas of the night sky. My hands, shoved deep into the pockets of a worn leather jacket, felt foreign, disconnected. They used to be instruments of order, of capture. Now they just felt empty. The official word was retirement. A polite euphemism for being kicked to the curb, my career shattered by a case that had gnawed at me, chewed me up, and spat me out. The ghost. That's what they called him. The phantom who wove his way through the city's underbelly, leaving no trace, only devastation. And I, Cole, the once celebrated detective, had been the one left standing in the wreckage, holding nothing but the tattered threads of a broken investigation. A patrol car, its beacon a slow, mournful pulse, crawled along the perimeter of the cut fence. They were looking for something or someone, just like I used to. The thought brought a bitter taste to my mouth. My phone vibrated, a harsh, insistent buzz against my thigh. I pulled it out, the screen casting a pale glow on my weathered face. A text from a former colleague, a man who still treated me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "Cole, you need to see this, now." The message was terse, devoid of pleasantries. It was the kind of message that usually preceded bad news or worse, a plea for my particular brand of reluctant expertise. The location tagged in the message was a loading dock, miles away, deep in the industrial district. A place I hadn't set foot in for years. The headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a path that felt both familiar and alien. Each mile that drew me closer to the city's grimy heart felt like a step further away from the peace I'd tried to carve out for myself in the desolate quiet of the desert. The loading dock was a hive of activity, a stark contrast to the emptiness I'd just left. Uniformed officers moved with a practiced urgency, their flashlights creating dancing spotlights in the cavernous space. The air was thick with the metallic tang of spilled oil and something else, something acrid and unsettling. A detective younger than me with sharp eyes and a jawline that spoke of ambition approached me. He held a file, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professionalism. "Cole, thanks for coming. We weren't sure you'd show." I met his gaze, my own unreadable. "You said it was urgent. What's happened?" He gestured towards a section of the warehouse, where the scene was cordoned off with yellow tape. The Serenity shipment vanished, not a scratch on the doors, no forced entry, clean as a whistle. My gut tightened. Serenity, the name of the pharmaceutical company that had been the ghost's last known target, the one that had broken me. "They found this," the detective said, his voice dropping. He held out a small, clear plastic bag. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a single, tarnished silver button. My breath hitched. I knew that button, the ghost's signature, a morbid calling card. "It's identical to the ones from the old cases," the detective continued, his gaze flickering to mine. "The same unique engraving. We ran it through every database, but nothing, no match." I stared at the button, the tiny, intricate detail of the swirling vortex etched into its surface. It was a miniature whirlpool, a symbol of drowning, of being pulled under. He was back, or at least, someone was playing a very cruel game. "How many men were involved?" I asked, my voice rough. "That's the thing," the detective said, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "No witnesses, no alarms triggered. The security footage from the exterior cameras, it just shows a brief power fluctuation, then nothing. When the power came back on, the truck was gone, empty. A power fluctuation, a meticulously planned diversion, the same MO. It was too much to be a coincidence. This wasn't just a heist. This was a message, a declaration. The ghosts of my past were stirring, and this time they were demanding more than just my attention. They were demanding my soul. The metallic tang of ozone still pricked my nostrils, a phantom scent from the disrupted power grid. It clung to the air like a shroud, mingling with the dry, mineral dust of the desert. My flashlight beam, a nervous tremor in my hand, cut a swath through the absolute black. This wasn't just darkness. This was a void that swallowed light, a tangible presence that pressed in. I knelt by the desert crossing point, fence-cut darkness. The severed wire glinting dully under my beam was a perfect surgical incision. No ragged edges, no signs of brute force. This was the work of a craftsman or someone who knew their tools intimately, just like the killer. Years ago, the phantom threads of his crimes had woven themselves into the fabric of my life, unraveling it thread by thread. Now, it seemed the pattern was re-emerging. My gaze swept over the disturbed sand. Not the heavy tread of boots, but something lighter, more deliberate. A measured gait, perhaps. I traced the faint outlines with my fingertip, the grit cool and fine against my skin. Each tiny detail felt like a breadcrumb, leading me deeper into a labyrinth I'd sworn I'd left behind. A low hum vibrated through the ground, a distant tremor that set my teeth on edge. The generators at the old processing plant, I guessed. They were still chugging away, their tireless pulse a counterpoint to the unsettling stillness of the night. A distraction, the initial report had said. A power surge, but this wasn't a surge, this was an amputation. A precise excision of power timed to perfection. It felt like the desert was holding its breath, waiting. My own breath hitched. Was I seeing things? A flicker of movement at the periphery of my vision, where the fence line dissolved into the inky blackness. I swung the flashlight, the beam lurching wildly. Nothing, just the wind coaxing dust devils into ephemeral dances. I'd been called in by a former colleague, a younger detective with an earnest face and a desperate plea. "Cole," he'd said, his voice tight with a fear I recognized all too well, "you're the only one who understands this. The abandoned warehouse emptied of its contents without a trace. The data center, its servers wiped clean in a matter of minutes, and now this. The desert crossing point, the fence cut. Each incident a mirror reflecting the ghost of the past. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring intrusion. The detective's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring, the sound echoing in the vast emptiness. He wanted me to work with them, to lend my expertise. The word felt like ash in my mouth. Expertise born of failure. Expertise that had cost lives. I pocketed the phone. I wasn't part of their world anymore, not officially, but the pull was undeniable. This wasn't just about a string of audacious robberies. This was about the killer. The one I'd chased through these same desolate landscapes, the one who'd slipped through my fingers like smoke. I had to see it through. I continued my circuit, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. The fence was more than just a barrier. It was a boundary, a line drawn in the sand. I found another set of impressions, fainter this time, leading away from the cut. They were too small for a man's boot. A woman, perhaps, or a child. The thought sent a fresh wave of disquiet through me. The killer had always been meticulous, surgical. He hadn't left victims, not in the traditional sense, but he had left wreckage. And I had a feeling this new wave would be no different. The wind picked up, a mournful sigh that swept across the desert. It carried the scent of creosote and something else, something metallic and acrid, like burnt wiring. I paused, straining my ears. A faint scraping sound, barely audible above the wind. It came from the direction the faint tracks were heading. My hand instinctively went to the worn leather grip of the handgun tucked into my waistband. It felt familiar, a heavy anchor in the swirling uncertainty. I wasn't the detective I used to be. The years had scoured away the arrogance, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve. But the instinct, the drive to understand, the need to put the pieces together, that remained. It was a sickness, a compulsion. I took a step, then another, following the phantom trail. The desert crossing point, fence cut, darkness. The words themselves felt like a brand seared into my memory. The wind, a dry rasp against my skin, whispered secrets I was too afraid to hear. Each grain of sand, a tiny, forgotten life, shifted under my worn boots, a testament to the passage of time, of lives lived and lost. My breath hitched, a small, ragged sound in the vast emptiness. It had been years since I'd last stood in a place like this, a place where the world felt stripped bare, reduced to its rawest elements. Here, under the indifferent gaze of a million stars, the past was a tangible weight, pressing down on my chest. The severed wires of the fence, like broken veins, still glinted dully in my flashlight's beam. They were a crude, violent statement, a testament to brute force overcoming fragile boundaries. This was the third time, the third echo of him, the same precision, the same audacious disregard for consequence. But this time the target was different, bigger. My hand instinctively went to the worn leather of my holster, a habit I'd tried and failed to shed. I'd thought I was out, buried, but the ghost of the past, it seemed, had a way of digging up the living. I knelt, my knees protesting against the gritty earth, and examined the ground. Boot prints, not just one set, but several, overlaid and smudged. They spoke of hurried movement, of a coordinated effort. But there was something else, too. A faint impression, almost erased by the wind, of something heavy being dragged. A crate, a piece of equipment. My gaze swept the perimeter again, my flashlight beam dancing across the scrub brush and the skeletal remains of long-dead cacti. Nothing. The perpetrators had vanished as cleanly as if they'd melted into the starlight. My mind replayed the details of the previous incidents. The jewelry store, the private art collection, each a carefully orchestrated act of larceny, leaving behind a signature so precise, so eerily familiar it made my teeth ache, and now this. A Federal Reserve depot. The stakes had risen, not just for the unknown thieves, but for me. Cole. They were asking for me, or rather he was. He was forcing my hand, pulling me back into the muck I'd sworn to leave behind. I stood, dusting off my trousers. This wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about survival, not just my own, but the survival of the fragile piece I'd managed to carve out for myself. The authorities, the ones who'd stripped me of my badge, would be all over this. And when they found the breadcrumbs leading back to me, they wouldn't be looking for a consultant. They'd be looking for a suspect. My phone, a brick of a thing that felt ancient in my palm, buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number, but the area code was local. My gut tightened. I answered, keeping my voice low. Cole. A gruff, heavily accented voice crackled through the speaker. They say Ira the one who knows about the ghost. The ghost. That's what the tabloids had called him years ago. I'd never used that moniker, it felt disrespectful. Who is this? A friend, or perhaps an observer, the depot. Cole, this wasn't a random informant. This was someone on the inside, or someone very close to the operation. What do you want? To ensure the narrative is accurate and to offer a word of caution. The ghost is growing bolder. This is no longer about wealth. The line went dead. The stakes had not only risen, they had become a precipice. And I was standing on the edge, the wind whipping at my coat, pushing me closer to the fall. I had to move, now. Before the ghost's message became a scream and the desert, this vast, silent expanse, became a tomb, my tomb or theirs. The silence after the call was a physical weight. I stood at the desert crossing point, fence-cut, darkness, the wind whipping grit against my face, stinging my eyes. The jagged tear in the chain-link fence was a gaping maw, a wound in the earth that swallowed the last vestiges of twilight. This wasn't just a crime scene anymore, it was a taunt. It illuminated the disturbed sand, the faint impressions of boots too many to count, too hurried to be distinct. They'd been efficient, these ghosts, like the ones from my past. The thought coiled in my gut, a familiar serpent. I knelt, my gloved fingers tracing the edge of the severed fence. The metal was cool, almost slick, a clean cut, not the ragged tear of brute force. Precision. That's what had always set him apart. And now here it was again. My gaze swept over the landscape, the low, scrubby bushes offering no cover, only skeletal silhouettes against a sky pricked with indifferent stars. The air, thin and dry, carried the faint, metallic tang of something I couldn't quite place, something that prickled the hairs on my neck. Not just the scent of disturbed earth and dried desert flora. Something else, something. Deliberate. I pulled out my phone, the screen a harsh rectangle of light in the gloom. The call log showed only the number, a burner already dead. No name, no history. I scrolled through my contacts, past the names I hadn't spoken to in years, the ones who represented a life I'd long since buried. I stopped at one, hesitating. My fingers hovered over the screen. He owed me, and I was running out of options. A low growl, not of an animal, but of an engine, broke the stillness. My hand instinctively went to the small, worn leather holster at my hip, the weight of the empty space a constant reminder. They were here, the official ones, the ones who'd washed their hands of me. A black SUV pulled to a stop, its engine idling with a low thrum. Two figures emerged, silhouetted against the headlights. The detective, her face a mask of professional detachment, and a uniformed officer, his posture stiff, wary. Cole, the detective's voice was sharp, cutting through the night. "What are you doing out here?" I stood, brushing the sand from my trousers. "Same as you, I imagine, investigating." The sarcasm was a thin veneer. "This is an active scene," she stated, her eyes flicking over the cut fence, then back to me. "You're not authorized." "Authorization is a luxury I can no longer afford," I replied, my voice flat. "This feels familiar, doesn't it? The precision, the staging, the message." The uniformed officer shifted his weight, his gaze fixed on the fence. The detective's expression didn't change, but a flicker in her eyes betrayed her. She knew what I meant. She'd read the old files. "We're handling it," she said, her tone dismissive. "Are you, or are you just cleaning up the mess?" I walked past the SUV, my flashlight beam playing over the ground. "Look at this. The way the sand is disturbed, not just a hurried escape. They were careful, almost artistic." I pointed to a series of faint impressions near a cluster of rocks. "See that? A slight scuff mark, almost invisible. They placed something here, something heavy, and then they moved it." The detective approached, her own beam joining mine. She studied the marks, her brow furrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting this isn't just about the merchandise they stole. This is a statement. They're not just thieves, they're performers. This was their opening act." I reached the outbuilding, its corrugated metal walls groaning in the wind. The door, a warped sheet of plywood, hung precariously on one hinge. I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and something else. Something chemical, acrid. My flashlight beam danced across the interior. Empty shelves lined the walls, but the floor was a chaotic tableau. scattered tools, pristine and gleaming, lay amidst the dust. And then I saw it. Scrawled on the far wall in what looked like dried mud was a symbol, a coiled serpent. The same symbol that had been left at every one of the serial killer's crime scenes. This wasn't a copycat, this was him, or someone who knew him intimately. The stakes hadn't just risen. The chemical tang in the outbuilding was stronger now, clinging to the back of my throat like a bitter promise. Dust motes, disturbed by my intrusion, swirled in the cone of my flashlight, tiny ghosts dancing in the gloom. The plywood door, a flimsy shield against the encroaching night, had surrendered its hold with a final, mournful creak. My boots crunched on loose gravel and what felt like broken glass, each step a small explosion in the suffocating quiet. This place, this derelict shed tucked away near the old desert crossing point, fence cut, darkness, it felt like a wound. The scent, sharp and metallic, pricked at a memory I'd tried to bury deep. It wasn't just dust and decay, it was the smell of desperation, of things left undone. My beam swept across the interior. Empty crates stacked haphazardly offered no sanctuary. A rusty barrel, its lid ajar, leaked a dark, viscous fluid onto the concrete floor. It pooled, catching the light, an ink-eye stain that seemed to absorb all warmth. This was where they worked, where they planned. It all pointed here. Then I saw it, tucked behind a stack of warped lumber, a small, leather-bound ledger. My heart gave a lurch, a familiar, unwelcome rhythm. I approached it cautiously, my breath held tight. The leather was worn smooth, the corners softened with age. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than its size suggested. Opening it, my flashlight beam illuminated cramped handwriting, a scrawl that was both familiar and alien. Dates, times, locations, coded entries. It was a logbook, a meticulous record of something, the name I hadn't dared to whisper in years. The name of the ghost that had chased me through every waking moment since the failure. A faint rustle from the far corner of the shed froze me. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by the low light and the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. "Cole!" The voice was a low rasp, like sandpaper on dry wood. It was Silas, or someone who knew Silas. My grip tightened on the ledger. "Ires Silas." It wasn't a question. A low chuckle devoid of humor answered me. A name like I, detective, a label for what we are or what we've become. He moved then, not with haste, but with a deliberate, unsettling grace. Older, yes, the sharp angles of his face softened by time, but the eyes, they were the same. The ledger was still in my hand, a weapon and a shield. He took another step, and I saw the glint of metal in his hand. Not a gun, but something longer, thinner. A blade, my blood, which had been thrumming with a dangerous adrenaline, suddenly felt sluggish, heavy. This wasn't the clean, calculated violence of the heists. This was personal. "I think I understand," Silas said, his gaze fixed on the ledger. "I think this is about the past. It's never about the past, Cole. It's always about what comes next." He lunged. The shed, already a claustrophobic space, became a battleground. The air filled with the clang of metal against metal as I parried his thrust with the heavy ledger, the worn leather groaning under the impact. He was fast, unnervingly so for his age. His movements were economical, deadly. Each strike was aimed with surgical precision, designed to maim, not to kill. He wanted me to suffer. I stumbled back, the concrete scraping against my boots. The chemical smell seemed to intensify, a dizzying perfume of violence. He pressed his advantage, his blade a blur in the dim light. I dodged, weaving between the crates, the dust rising in clouds around us. He knew this place. He moved with an assuredness that I, the intruder, lacked. I heard him chuckle again, a dry, rattling sound. "I rest slower, Cole," he taunted, his voice a phantom whisper in the dark. "The weight of my failures slows I down." His words struck home, sharper than any blade. The memory of the other victims, the ones I couldn't save, flooded my mind. The faces, the unanswered questions. Doubt, a venomous serpent, began to coil in my gut. Had I walked into a trap? Was this a distraction, a way to lead me away from the real threat? A sharp pain flared in my arm. I cried out, stumbling again. He had caught me, a shallow cut, but enough to make me falter. He was toying with me. "The ledger," Silas's voice was closer now, a sinister murmur right beside my ear. "I think it tells I everything. It tells I what I wanted I to see." I felt a heavy weight slam into my side, knocking the wind out of me. "A lesson, you're still chasing ghosts, detective." The sound of his retreating footsteps, a soft scuffing on the gravel, faded into the vast, indifferent desert night. The ledger was gone. Silas was gone. That was my world now, a raw wound in the earth stitched with barbed wire. The air still tasted of that metallic tang, the chemical ghost clinging to my tongue. My arm throbbed, constant, insistent reminder of my folly. I'd let him go. Again, or rather, I'd let them go. The realization settled like grit under my skin. I pushed myself up, my muscles protesting. The moon, a sliver of bone in the ink-black sky, offered little light. It was enough to see the jagged edges of the fence, a gaping maw torn open by a professional. No amateur work this, just like the others. The precision, the planning, the chilling echo of the case that had broken me. My gaze swept the desolate landscape. Nothing. No telltale footprints beyond the ones I'd already scrutinized, no discarded tools, no sign of the frantic scramble one might expect from a hurried escape. But I had something, a fragment. The way the technician spoke, his voice tight with a fear that went beyond mere apprehension. He hadn't just been scared of being caught, he'd been scared of them. And his rambling, his panicked attempts to deflect, had given me a glimpse of a pattern. The heists weren't random. They weren't about the money, not entirely. The stolen goods, while valuable, were specific. Certain rare isotopes, certain high-grade components, things that could be used for what? My mind, a battlefield of old ghosts and new fears, struggled to assemble the pieces. I'd found a small, tarnished locket near the technician's discarded gear. It was the kind of sentimental trinket one might find in a forgotten drawer, not a clandestine rendezvous in the middle of nowhere. Inside, a faded photograph of a woman. Not a wife, I suspected. More like a memory, a motivation. Back in my makeshift base of operations, a disused shipping container I'd found rusting near the coast, I spread out the meager evidence. The schematics of the facility's hit, the purchase orders for the obscure chemicals, the witness statements from the few terrified souls who'd glimpsed something they shouldn't have, and the locket. The woman in the photograph. Her eyes held a familiar melancholy. I'd seen that look before, etched onto the faces of the victims, the collateral damage of a life lived on the fringes. It was the look of someone who had lost everything. Then it clicked. The technician's words, jumbled and fearful, replayed in my mind. He said it's for them, for what they took. Them, not him, plural, and the stolen goods, not for profit, but for purpose. The killer I'd hunted years ago, the one who'd left his signature on a string of unsolved disappearances, had a motive that had always eluded me. Revenge, I'd theorized. But revenge against whom? And why the meticulous staging, the almost artistic flair to his crimes? I traced the lines on the schematics, my finger moving from the point of entry to the location of the stolen materials. It was a trail, not of destruction, but of acquisition. And the locket. It wasn't just a memento, it was a key. A missing persons report from a decade ago, a family wiped out. A young woman, the sole survivor, lost to the system, her name. I'd dismissed it then, another tragedy in a city overflowing with them, but the face in the locket, it was her. Younger, yes, but undeniably her. The killer hadn't been a single entity. It had been a group, a collective. They were about reclaiming something or someone. My own past case, the one that had tarnished my badge and my soul, suddenly felt less like a failure and more like a prelude. The killer I'd chased was a phantom, a smokescreen, the stolen materials. They weren't for building a bomb or a weapon. They were for restoring something or someone. I wasn't just chasing a copycat. I was on the trail of the original players, and their game had just escalated from vengeance to resurrection. The technician hadn't been afraid of being caught for theft. He'd been terrified of what they intended to do. And now I understood why. The question wasn't who was behind these heists, but who was the intended recipient of their desperate, dangerous efforts. The answer, I suspected, was far more horrifying than any serial killer. The dust, a fine, gritty powder, still coated my tongue, a bitter residue of the desert crossing point, fence cut, darkness. My arm, a dull ache beneath the makeshift bandage, throbbed in time with the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. He'd slipped through my fingers, a phantom dissolving into the moon-scarred landscape. And the scent, that acrid chemical whisper, it lingered, a promise of more to come. I traced the jagged tear in the wire with a gloved finger, not a clean cut, but a violent ripping, as if a beast had clawed its way through. This wasn't the work of a common thief. This was the signature. The same meticulous, brutal efficiency that had haunted my dreams for 5 years. The same precision that had branded me a failure. Back in my borrowed space, a converted warehouse smelling faintly of rust and stale oil, the reports lay spread across a scarred workbench. The timing, the execution, the utter lack of witnesses, each heist a perfect echo of the past. But now the stakes had been irrevocably raised. The targets weren't just banks or armored cars. They were the remnants of my life, the few threads I'd managed to salvage from the wreckage. The first inkling of this new personal assault came with a hushed call from a former colleague, a streetwise woman with eyes that missed nothing. Her voice, usually a low rumble of street slang and insider knowledge, was tight with an unfamiliar fear. "Cole," he'd breathed, the static crackling between us. "They've got him." My gut clenched. "Your informant, the one who fed you the breadcrumbs about the..." Silas. He'd been too clever for his own good, a bird with too much insight into the cage. Where? I demanded, my voice rough. The old industrial zone near the abandoned cannery. They found his car. Her voice broke, a tiny tremor that spoke volumes. The abandoned cannery, a hulking skeletal structure on the edge of the city, a monument to forgotten industry. It was a place I knew well, a place I'd scoured countless times in pursuit of ghosts. Now it was a hunting ground. I grabbed my worn leather jacket, the familiar weight settling on my shoulders like a second skin. The city lights blurred outside the grimy warehouse windows, a distant, indifferent hum. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about retribution. It was about silencing a threat that had dared to touch the few people I still cared about. The drive to the industrial zone was a blur of tense anticipation. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something else. Something metallic and sharp like ozone before a storm. The abandoned cannery loomed, a jagged silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Rusting machinery lay scattered like fallen giants, and the air was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten hands. I circled the perimeter, my senses on high alert. The smell was stronger here, that distinctive chemical tang. Then I saw it. Silas's beat-up sedan, parked haphazardly near a gaping hole in the cannery's corrugated iron wall. One of its tires was slashed, the rubber weeping black. My heart hammered a discordant rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The trap had been sprung, and Silas was the bait. I eased myself through the jagged opening, the sharp edges of the metal scraping against my jacket. I could hear it then, a low, rhythmic dripping, like a morbid metronome. My hand instinctively went to the worn grip of the pistol tucked into my waistband. This wasn't a game of cat and mouse anymore. This was a declaration of war, and I was the target. Silas's last words, a desperate whisper choked with dust, echoed in the cavernous silence of my apartment. Desert crossing point, fence cut, darkness. The phrase itself felt like a brand, a promise of what was to come. Silas, he'd been a loose thread, a flickering candle in the wind of this whole mess, and now the wind had clearly blown him out. I pulled on my oldest jacket, the leather cracked and worn, a testament to years spent chasing ghosts. The night air bit at my exposed skin as I stepped out, the city a distant hum of indifferent life. My beat-up sedan coughed to life, a familiar rumble that usually soothed my nerves, but tonight it felt like a drumbeat of impending doom. Silas had been my eyes and ears in places I couldn't venture without drawing too much attention. Each turn of the wheel felt like a step deeper into a mire I'd sworn I'd left behind. The old Silas, the one who'd traded trinkets for information, would have been more careful. He'd have left breadcrumbs, a coded message. But this Silas, the one who'd stumbled onto something too big, too dangerous, had simply run. It was a place for things to disappear, permanently. The industrial zone was a skeletal remains of progress, rusting husks of machinery gnawed by time and the elements. The air here tasted of metallic decay and something else, something acrid and unsettling. I found the fence easily enough, a gaping tear as if a giant hand had ripped through the barbed wire, leaving jagged teeth glinting in the faint starlight. This was the crossing point. It was absolute. This was where Silas had met his end. I could feel it. The stillness was too heavy, too deliberate. My gut churned. This wasn't just about Silas anymore, not again. I remembered the killer's signature, the meticulous planning, the almost artistic execution, the complete absence of collateral damage beyond what was absolutely necessary. They didn't leave loose ends. Silas was a loose end, very close. A plan began to form, a desperate gamble born of necessity and a burning need for retribution. I couldn't go in blind. I needed to lure them out, to turn their own precision against them. The heists had been about precision, about timing, and Silas's disappearance. It was a signal, a message. I continued my sweep, my flashlight beam dancing across the desolate terrain. I found it near the tear in the fence, a small, almost imperceptible scuff mark on the packed earth, too clean to be natural. Someone had been here recently, someone who knew how to tread lightly. My breath hitched. I pulled out a small, encrypted burner phone, a relic from my past, rarely used, but its network was untraceable. I typed a short, cryptic message, playing on the perpetrator's presumed arrogance. "You missed a spot." And a witness? I sent it to a number Silas had given me, a dead drop for his more sensitive intel. If they were monitoring Silas's communications, they'd see it. If they were as meticulous as I suspected, they'd want to ensure their perfection remained unblemished. Then I found a better spot. A derelict warehouse, its corrugated iron walls groaning in the wind, a gaping maw of a doorway leading into blackness. Perfect. I drove my car a short distance away, then walked back, leaving the doors unlocked, the keys in the ignition. A lure. A tempting prize for someone who dealt in the taking of things. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with the smell of stale oil and decay. I moved through the vast space, my senses on high alert. I found a vantage point behind a stack of rotting crates, the rough wood digging into my back. My hand rested on the grip of the heavy pistol I carried, its familiar weight a small comfort in this unsettling expanse. I waited, the silence stretched, taut and brittle. Doubt, a familiar companion, began to creep in. Had I misread the signs? Was this just a wild goose chase born of grief and desperation? It could have been anything, a botched smuggling operation, a territorial dispute. It gnawed at me. And Silas's disappearance, so abrupt, so final, felt like a deliberate act, not a random tragedy. Then a sound. A faint, metallic click from the far end of the warehouse. My muscles tensed. My heart, which I'd sworn wouldn't pound, began to beat a steady, insistent rhythm against my ribs. Another click, closer this time. The sound of careful, deliberate movement. They were here. The trap was set, and I was the bait. The words clawed at my mind, a fragmented prophecy delivered by a dying man. Desert crossing point, fence cut, darkness. Silas, my informant, my last thread to the ghost of the serpent, was gone, and he'd left me with this cryptic breadcrumb, a trail leading deeper into the shadows I'd sworn to escape. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of stale coffee and forgotten files, felt like a cage. The air, thick with the smell of old paper and my own desperation, offered no solace. The desert crossing point, a place where fences were not boundaries, but commodities cut and sold like any other illicit cargo. Silas's dying breath had painted the picture, a stark, brutal tableau. I grabbed my worn leather jacket, the familiar weight a small comfort against the gnawing unease. The city lights blurred into streaks as I drove, each mile a step further from the life I'd tried to build, a step closer to the one that had nearly broken me. And now, Silas's last words confirmed it. He was back, or at least his methods were. The drive to the edge of the city was long, the asphalt surrendering to rutted tracks that chewed at my tires. The air grew thin, carrying the scent of dry earth and something metallic, something that hinted at the rot beneath the surface. I found the place Silas had described, or rather what I imagined it to be. A vast, desolate expanse, a scar on the earth where the desert began to swallow the discarded bones of civilization. Broken fences, jagged teeth against the bruised twilight sky lay strewn across the cracked ground, a veritable graveyard of boundaries. Blood. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement near a half-collapsed corrugated iron structure, a skeletal remains of some forgotten outpost. My hand instinctively went to the reassuring weight of the pistol tucked into my waistband. The structure was little more than a shell, its metal groaning in the wind. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. Tall, lean, with a predatory stillness that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the serpent. Cole, a voice rasped, low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. It was a voice I'd replayed 1,000 times in my head, a voice that had haunted my nightmares. "You're late." Silas told me, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor that ran through me. He told me everything. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped him. Did he? Silas was prone to embellishment. He never understood the art of it, the sheer, exquisite beauty of dismantling order. He took a step forward, and I saw it then, glinting in the meager light a long, wicked blade. Not a gun, not the usual tools of his trade. This was personal. This was about the past, about the unfinished symphony of destruction he'd left behind. But the true artistry lies in the subtle unraveling, the slow, deliberate severing of connections, like a fence cut strand by strand. He gestured vaguely at the scattered metal around us. My mind raced. The heists, the precision, the serpent's obsession with breaking down systems. He wasn't just stealing, he was proving a point. And Silas, in his final moments, had led me directly to him, to the very heart of his twisted obsession. "You killed him," I stated, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. He tilted his head, a subtle, unnerving gesture. "He became a loose end. A loose end is an imperfection, and I abhor imperfection." The tension between us was a palpable thing, a coiled spring ready to snap. My training warred with the raw, visceral need for retribution. I saw my own failure, the stain that had never quite washed away. "It ends here," I said, my hand tightening on the grip of my pistol. He laughed again, a sound that scraped against my nerves. "Does it, Cole?" The fight was on. The dry air, sharp with the scent of creosote and something metallic, clung to my lungs. I stood at the desert crossing point, fence cut, darkness a heavy shroud around us. The echoes of the struggle still vibrated in the stillness, a phantom tremor against the vast, indifferent canvas of the night sky. My hands, still slick with a residue I didn't want to examine too closely, trembled not with fear, but with the sheer, exhausting release of it all. He lay sprawled on the parched earth, a broken marionette whose strings had finally snapped. The meticulous planning, the chilling precision that had defined his every move, now reduced to a crumpled heap under the indifferent gaze of a million stars. The weight I'd carried for so long, the phantom limb of justice denied, felt a fraction lighter. Not gone, never gone, but shifted, acknowledged. A colleague knelt beside him, their movements efficient, practiced. I watched, detached, as they checked for a pulse, their face a mask of grim professionalism. My own mind was a chaotic swirl of relief and a deep, gnawing melancholy. This was it, the end of the road for the architect of so much ruin. But for me, it was merely the end of a chapter, a brutal punctuation mark on a story that had bled into every corner of my existence. I remembered the faces, blurred by time and trauma, but etched into the deepest parts of me. The young woman with the bright, hopeful eyes found too late. The quiet man, a craftsman whose hands had been stilled mid-creation. The colleague stood, their gaze meeting mine. "It's over, Cole," they replied, their voice rough, devoid of triumph. Just the simple, stark statement of fact. I nodded, the movement stiff. Yes, I managed, the word catching in my throat. It's over. But was it? The man on the ground, the orchestrator of so much pain, was no longer a phantom. Yet the other specter, the one that resided within me, the shadow of my own shortcomings, remained. It was a more insidious foe, one that couldn't be apprehended, couldn't be cuffed. The cut in the fence, a jagged wound in the earth, marked the boundary between his world and mine, between the hunted and the hunter. The stolen artifacts, the carefully curated collection of a madman's obsession, lay scattered nearby, glinting dully in the faint moonlight. Each piece represented a transgression, a violation, a stolen moment of peace for someone else. I'd spent weeks piecing together the breadcrumbs, the subtle signatures, the almost imperceptible deviations from his former pattern that had led me back to this desolate place. He had grown bolder, more arrogant, believing he had outsmarted me. He had been wrong. A sudden gust of wind whipped dust into my face, stinging my eyes. I blinked, the grit a temporary distraction from the deeper ache. I had followed the trail of meticulous planning, the almost artistic precision of his heists, and found him. It had been a desperate chase, a sprint against the clock, with the specter of past failures nipping at my heels. I had replayed the original case 1,000 times in my mind, searching for the missed clue, the overlooked detail. And in doing so, I had inadvertently stumbled upon the very threads that connected his past crimes to his present ones. He had been learning, evolving, and I had almost let him succeed again. Doubt. Had I been too late? Had I only caught him because he had grown careless, not because I had truly outmaneuvered him? I pushed the thought away, a futile exercise. The outcome was what mattered. The present danger had been neutralized. As the first hint of pre-dawn gray began to smudge the eastern horizon, I saw the approaching headlights. I had done my part. The case was closed. The killer, or rather the man who had played the part of the killer, was caught. But the resolution I sought wasn't solely in his apprehension. It was in the quiet acknowledgement of my own path, the acceptance of my scars. I had faced the phantom, the ghost of my past, and found that it no longer held the same power. And in that fragile space, a sliver of light, a promise of a different kind of dawn, began to emerge.